Rain lashed against the courthouse steps like nature itself was protesting what was about to happen. Olivia Carter, only 27, yet carrying the weight of years far heavier than her age, stood beneath a black umbrella that wasn't hers. It had been handed to her by a clerk. More a gesture of procedure than kindness. Her hair clung to her temples. Her dress was understated, no silk, no lace. Just a plain cream suit that looked out of place among the marble pillars and looming structure behind her. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and damp wool coats, a far cry from the roses and music that should accompany a wedding. At a long oak table sat Daniel Hayes, 30 years old, his pen already poised as though waiting only for her to fall in line. He didn't look at her as she entered. His eyes stayed fixed on the legal document spread neatly before him. A prenuptial agreement, a marriage license, a contract, every word stripped of tenderness, reduced to black ink and signatures. Olivia's hand trembled only slightly as she signed, each stroke a reminder of why she was there, her younger brother drowning in debt, loan sharks circling like vultures, and Daniel offering the only lifeline. But the lifeline came with chains. 1 year of marriage. Appearances upheld. No talk of love, no promises of forever. Just survival, cold and transactional. The final click of the pen echoed louder in her chest than the rain outside, sealing a bargain that would define her life from this moment forward. The courthouse was left behind as quickly as it had been entered, traded for a reception that was less a celebration and more a stage performance. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the ballroom, but Olivia felt none of its warmth. She moved through a sea of strangers dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, their eyes cutting toward her with curiosity, judgment, and thinly veiled disdain. Daniel walked beside her, his hand lightly grazing hers when photographers pointed their lenses, yet the contact was mechanical, almost rehearsed. There was no pressure of affection, no warmth seeping from his skin, just the necessary illusion of unity. Then came Victoria. Tall, perfectly poised, her beauty sharpened into cruelty, she cornered Olivia near the champagne tower. With a voice low enough to pass beneath the chatter, yet sharp enough to pierce, Victoria whispered, "He'll never love you. You're just his paperwork bride." The words landed like knives, stabbing at Olivia's fragile composure. Every eye in the room seemed to weigh her reaction, waiting for a crack in the carefully crafted mask she wore. But Olivia, trained by hardship to swallow humiliation like bitter medicine, simply smiled. A small, steady smile that cost her every ounce of strength. She lifted her glass, nodded once, and walked away before her humiliation could show. Yet inside, her chest burned with shame, with rage, with the ache of being so blatantly dismissed, not just by Victoria, but by the silent approval of everyone who believed her nothing more than a pawn in Daniel Hayes' story. What no one in that glittering ballroom could see was the storm that churned beneath Olivia's calm mask. She had learned long ago that tears and fury earned her nothing. Survival meant composure, and composure was her armor. If Daniel Hayes wanted a wife on paper, she would be that. If his family demanded a polished smile, she would give them one. But beneath the practiced grace was a woman who refused to break, who refused to become just another footnote in the empire's endless negotiations. Humiliation might sear her now, but it would not define her. Every cruel glance, every cutting remark, every sneer like Victoria's would be stored deep inside her, not as wounds, but as fuel. The contract may have bound her in ink, but it had also awakened something far more dangerous, a resolve to endure, to outlast, and perhaps even to turn the very chains into weapons. The hook for this story isn't romance, because love was never offered. The hook is survival, defiance, and the slow, inevitable collision of two guarded souls, Daniel, who believed he could orchestrate control without consequence, and Olivia, who would teach him what it meant to face someone who would not be broken. And so, as the rain outside still whispered against the windows and laughter floated through the reception, Olivia raised her glass to no one in particular. Her smile remained steady, her heart silently vowing, this arrangement may have started as his game, but it would not end on his terms. That Olivia Carter's life had been shaped not by what she wanted, but by what was demanded of her. Her earliest memories were not of toys or carefree afternoons, but of her mother working 2 shifts just to keep food on the table. Exhaustion etched into her every gesture. When their father abandoned them, Olivia was only 10, but she understood instantly what it meant. Childhood was over. She became Ethan's protector, his surrogate parent, his shield from the world's cruelty. She held his hand at parent-teacher meetings, made sure he ate when their mother was too tired to cook, and quietly traded her own small dreams for his survival. Art had once been her refuge, the sketchbook under her bed filled with drawings of places she'd never see, faces she'd never meet. She dreamed of art school, of independence, of building something that was hers alone. But those dreams grew dusty as Ethan grew reckless, lured into debts he couldn't pay, and Olivia stepped in again, as she always did. By the time Daniel Hayes extended his cold, conditional offer of marriage, Olivia already knew the shape of sacrifice. Signing that contract wasn't the beginning of her compromise. It was merely the culmination of years spent burying her own desires to keep the people she loved afloat. Yet, somewhere deep within, the artist in her still stirred, whispering that life was meant to be more than endurance, more than debt and duty. Daniel Hayes was raised in privilege, but privilege had always felt like a prison. His childhood was gilded but loveless, dominated by Richard Hayes, a man who measured worth not in affection but in obedience and image. From the time Daniel could tie a tie, he was trained to stand straight, speak little, and never let weakness slip through the cracks. His mother, elegant and silent, had long ago learned to retreat into the background, leaving Daniel to weather his father's iron expectations alone. Friends were chosen for him, schools decided for him, and even the women he dated were scrutinized as if they were investments in the family's empire. Love was a word that never crossed Richard's lips. Marriage, he insisted, was about consolidation, about appearances, about building alliances stronger than feelings. And so Daniel grew into the man his father demanded, sharp, composed, untouchable. Yet beneath the polish, a quiet rebellion simmered. He had glimpses of what life could be, a laugh that slipped out unguarded, a night spent with someone who wanted him. Not his last name, but those moments were fleeting, stolen and always punished when discovered. When scandal threatened the Hayes image, his father's solution was simple, a contract marriage to soften the headlines. Olivia Carter fit the mold, perfectly modest background, compliant and neat. What Daniel hadn't expected was that behind her guarded eyes was someone who mirrored his own cage. He told himself this marriage was strategy, nothing more. But deep down, he craved something Richard had denied him his entire life. Genuine connection, fragile but real. The penthouse they now shared was vast enough to keep them apart, designed like a kingdom where silence echoed louder than words. Olivia had her wing-airy rooms, soft furnishings that never felt like hers, and Daniel had his, lined with dark wood and steel, reflecting his father's taste more than his own. To the public, they were the picture of unity, photographed on balconies, hands grazing during charity galas, smiles rehearsed until they looked almost real. Behind closed doors, the mask slipped. Meals were often eaten alone, conversations clipped and functional. Daniel spoke to her with the same formality he used with business associates, and Olivia matched his tone, unwilling to bear more than necessary. And yet, beneath the frost, there was an undercurrent neither could ignore. Sometimes she caught him watching her sketch absent-mindedly on a napkin, his expression unreadable. Sometimes his voice softened when he forgot himself, betraying the loneliness he carried. Their marriage was not built on love, but on duty, hers to her brother, his to his father. Olivia wanted freedom, but had been trapped in a cage of her own making, a cage of sacrifice and survival. Daniel wanted control, but longed, secretly and silently, for something he'd never been given: closeness, warmth, the permission to be vulnerable. This was the tension that defined them, not fiery passion, not tender affection, but the ache of two people locked in roles neither chose, orbiting each other in a silence filled with longing, resentment, and the faint, dangerous possibility of something more. The charity gala glittered with chandeliers and champagne, every corner alive with the hum of conversation and the click of cameras. Olivia stood at Daniel's side, a practiced smile painted across her lips, her gown chosen not for herself, but for the image it projected: sleek, respectable, unthreatening. She had perfected the art of blending in, of nodding at the right times, of appearing agreeable yet forgettable. But then, as she stepped behind a velvet curtain on her way back from the powder room, she heard Richard Hayes's voice, calm, commanding, and razor-sharp. "She's nothing more than a disposable pawn," he told a colleague, swirling his drink without a trace of remorse. The words sank into Olivia's chest like shards of glass. For a moment, she froze, her instincts urging her to swallow the insult as she always had. But something inside her, perhaps the echo of every sacrifice, every humiliation endured, snapped. When she returned to the main hall, Richard was addressing a cluster of donors, his presence magnetic as ever. Olivia stepped forward, her voice clear, her smile disarmingly sweet. "I do hope Mr. Hayes remembers his pawns can sometimes outmaneuver kings," she said, her remark landing with a sting soft by wit. Laughter rippled through the crowd, eyes widened, and Richard's smile faltered. Olivia felt her heart hammer, but she held her ground, savoring the rare moment where her voice, not her silence, commanded the room. Daniel, standing only a few feet away, had expected Olivia to endure his father's cruelty as quietly as she endured everything else. But when her words cut through the gala's chatter, something shifted in him. For years, he had watched people cower under Richard's shadow, bending to his will, never daring to challenge him. Yet Olivia, the woman he had dismissed as an obligation, stood in front of the city's elite and struck Richard with nothing more than wit and poise. Daniel's first instinct should have been irritation. His father would see this as rebellion, a threat to the family's careful facade. But instead, pride flickered in him, strange and foreign. He studied her differently then, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she turned humiliation into humor, weakness into strength. For the first time, Olivia wasn't just the woman trapped in a contract or the wife he barely knew. She was something more: equal, dangerous. Daniel felt the pain of something he couldn't quite name: admiration, perhaps, or longing for the courage he had never managed to summon in his father's presence. As the laughter died and conversation resumed, he found himself not chastising her, but watching her with new, unsettling attention. Olivia had drawn a line in the sand, and against all expectation, Daniel found himself silently cheering for her. The fallout was swift. By the next morning, gossip columns screamed with fresh headlines: "Gold digger Olivia Carter embarrasses Hayes patriarch." From debt to diamonds, the bride who played the system. Victoria's hand was obvious, her fingerprints all over the leak, spinning Olivia's defiance into greed. Paparazzi swarmed, microphones thrust at her face, each question sharper than the last. Did you marry him for money? Did you plan this spectacle? Strangers on social media dissected her every gesture, branding her ambitious, manipulative, false. The humiliation clawed deeper than Richard's insult ever had. Alone in the penthouse, Olivia slammed the tabloids onto the marble counter, her mask cracking. Daniel entered, silent as ever, but she refused to let the silence swallow her this time. Her voice shook but remained strong. If I'm going to survive this circus, we need rules. No more silence. No more pretending I'm invisible. If we're in this together, then act like it. Her demand cut through the air, heavier than any contract they had signed. Daniel hesitated, his instinct pulling him back toward distance, toward the safety of walls. But then he saw her not just as his wife on paper, but as the woman who had stood against his father and now against the world. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice low, measured. It was a concession, small but significant, the first step toward rewriting the unspoken terms of their arrangement. For Olivia, it was not victory, but it was survival, a shift that meant she would no longer fade into the background of Daniel Hayes' life. She would stand beside him, or not at all. The penthouse no longer felt like Daniel's fortress of solitude. Slowly, deliberately, Olivia began to leave her fingerprints on it. Where once the walls had been lined with Richard Hayes' choice of dark wood and sterile art, Olivia replaced them with softer touches, sunlight spilling through curtains she insisted stay open, paintings she had chosen from local artists, colors that breathed life into rooms long suffocated by formality. She stopped asking for permission and started taking space, daring to attend business dinners where wives were meant to smile and stay quiet. Instead, Olivia listened closely, interjecting at moments Daniel would never have allowed. Her observations sharp, her wit disarming. To outsiders, she was the polished wife with a steel edge. To Daniel, she was increasingly infuriating. He had signed up for silence, for compliance, for a wife who would fade into the background. But Olivia was rewriting the role without asking. Annoyance flickered in him, sharp as ever, yet beneath it grew something he could not suppress, an attraction to her fire, a reluctant admiration for her refusal to bend. He would scowl when she challenged his decisions, but later, in the quiet of his study, he found himself replaying her words, unsettled by how often she was right. Their marriage was no longer a cold arrangement. It was becoming a battleground, and Daniel was realizing that he didn't want her to surrender. The tension between them simmered until one night it cracked open into something raw. Olivia returned from a charity event, mascara smudged, her shoulders trembling as tabloids plastered her with insults that had nothing to do with who she really was. For the first time, Daniel didn't retreat into silence. He poured her a drink, his hands uncharacteristically steady, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Ignore them," he murmured, sliding the glass toward her. She looked at him, surprised by the absence of mockery, and for a moment the distance between them shrank. They spoke not about contracts or appearances, but about loneliness, about masks they both wore, about the weight of expectations neither had chosen. The air between them charged, fragile, and magnetic. Yet neither crossed the line. The moment hung there, dangerous in its intimacy, before dissolving back into silence. But the fragile thread that bound them was tested soon after. Ethan, Olivia's brother, slipped back into old habits, gambling away what little chance he had left. Daniel discovered it first. His anger wasn't loud but precise, cutting. "You'll burn for people who never bleed for you." His words struck Olivia's deepest wound, but she refused to bow. Her voice cracked with fury as she shot back, "At least I still believe in loyalty. Can you say the same?" The room pulsed with the clash of values, her relentless devotion to family, his cynicism born from betrayal. Neither won, but both left scarred. Into the growing fracture stepped Victoria, her presence a serpent's whisper. She knew Daniel's doubts, the cracks in his armor, and she fed them with precision. Over wine and hushed corners, at boardrooms dressed as social events, she planted her poison carefully. "You do realize she's only here until her brother's debts are gone," she murmured, her smile a mask of sympathy. "After that, What's keeping her? Not love. Not you. The words burrowed into Daniel's mind, striking at the insecurity he would never admit aloud. He had begun to see Olivia as something more than a contract, but Victoria's insinuations reminded him of the original terms, the signatures, the bargain, the desperate debt. Could Olivia's defiance, her warmth, her rare moments of vulnerability all be strategy? Late at night, Daniel found himself replaying their conversation about loyalty, wondering if her fire was for him or simply for the family she had always sacrificed for. The doubt gnawed at him, even as he found himself drawn closer, even as he sought her presence more than he cared to confess. For Olivia, the change was subtle but cutting. His silences grew heavier. His eyes lingered with questions unspoken. She felt the shift but didn't yet know its source. Victoria's shadow loomed over them both, widening the gulf just as fragile trust had begun to grow. What had started as annoyance blossoming into attraction was now twisting into suspicion. The foundation of something real threatened. Before it could even take root, the night was heavy with rain when Daniel's world tilted. He had left a late meeting, irritation simmering from the constant pressure of his father's demands, when he spotted Olivia across the street, standing beneath the awning of a closed cafe. She wasn't alone. A man sharply dressed, briefcase in hand leaned close, handing her a folder. Daniel's chest tightened, heat flooding his veins as he watched her tuck the papers against her chest like a secret. Something inside him snapped. All of Victoria's whispers, all the doubts he had tried to ignore, surged into cruel clarity. By the time Olivia returned to the penthouse, Daniel was waiting, fury coiled tight in his jaw. "I should have known," he bit out, voice low, dangerous. "You were always in it for the money." The accusation cut Olivia deeper than she could have imagined. She dropped the folder onto the marble counter, her hands shaking, her heart breaking with each syllable. "That's what you think of me?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal, not hers, but his. Daniel's eyes burned with rage and fear, but beneath it lay something even sharper, disbelief that he had trusted her, even for a moment. Olivia's chest rose and fell as she gathered the last of her dignity. "I gave you everything, my pride, my name," she said, tears slipping free. "All you saw was a contract." With that, she turned, her heels striking the floor like gunshots, and walked out, leaving Daniel in a silence heavier than any storm. Hours later, pacing through his study, Daniel's fury curdled into unease. The folder she had dropped still sat unopened on the counter. His hands shook as he finally tore it open, expecting proof of betrayal, evidence that Victoria had been right. Instead, the truth unraveled with devastating clarity. Bank statements, transfers, every dollar traced back to Olivia's own freelance work, side jobs she had hidden from the cameras, quiet sacrifices he had never noticed. And at the center of it all, Ethan's debt, paid down piece by piece until only one final sum remained. Olivia hadn't been scheming against him, she had been planning her freedom. She wasn't securing wealth from him. She was severing the chains that bound her to his family name. She was preparing to walk away clean, owing him nothing, bound by no contract, no debt. The weight of his mistake crashed into him, crushing and merciless. He had accused her of the one thing she had fought so desperately to disprove. His chest ached with a hollow, consuming regret, his mind replaying every moment, her quiet strength, her sacrifices, the loyalty he had dismissed as weakness. Daniel realized, with a clarity that stole his breath, that Olivia had given more than he ever deserved. And in return, he had given her only suspicion, cruelty, and chains. He couldn't let her leave like this. Not when he finally understood what she was worth, not as his wife on paper, but as the only person who had ever stood beside him, unafraid. Daniel found her the next evening, suitcase in hand, waiting at the train station where the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Rain clung to her hair, her eyes swollen but resolute. She didn't flinch when he appeared, breathless, desperate, a man stripped of all composure. "Olivia," he said, his voice raw, torn from somewhere deeper than pride. She turned, her chin lifting even as her lips trembled. "Don't," she warned, her voice breaking. "I gave you everything, my pride, my name. All you saw was a contract." The word struck him harder than any blow, but he stepped closer, shaking his head. "No," he said, the word a plea. "I saw the only person who ever stood up to me, the only one who ever stayed." The train roared in the distance, but neither moved. The air between them pulsed with anger, regret, and something neither could name without breaking. Olivia's tears fell freely now, her walls collapsing under the weight of everything she had carried. Daniel reached for her, his hands trembling as if afraid she would vanish. "I was wrong," he whispered. "About you. About everything. Don't go." For the first time, his voice cracked with vulnerability, not command. Olivia searched his face, her own heart torn between fury and longing, between the freedom she had earned and the man who finally saw her. The station hummed around them, strangers rushing past, but in that suspended moment, it was only them two broken souls, walls shattered, finally stripped of masks. Whether ended in forgiveness or ruin, the contract was no longer what bound them. It was the raw, undeniable pull of truth and the terrifying possibility of love. Olivia's new apartment was small, tucked above a bookstore that smelled of paper and ink, but to her it was a palace. There were no marble floors, no sweeping staircases, no chandeliered ceilings, just creaking wooden boards, sunlight filtering through thin curtains, and a quiet she owned. For the first time, she wasn't measured by contracts, debts, or Daniel's name. Every corner bore her touch, a chipped mug holding brushes, sketchbooks piled by the window, a vase with wildflowers she bought for herself. On her first night, she sat cross-legged on the floor, pencil in hand, staring at the blank page. Her fingers trembled. Could she still draw? Could she still create after years of being silenced? The graphite touched paper hesitantly, then flowed, lines gathering into shapes, shapes into figures. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She sketched until dawn, until the pages filled with pieces of herself she had once buried. In that small apartment, Olivia felt freedom not as an abstract dream, but as a physical presence etched in her drawings, in the rhythm of her breath, in the absence of chains. For the first time, she didn't have to prove her worth to anyone. She simply existed, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Daniel faced the one battle he had spent his life avoiding, his father. The man sat at the head of a long oak table, every inch the patriarch cold, calculating, carved in stone. "You ruined everything," his father hissed, slamming a contract down. "You had her bound, and you let her go. Do you think love is choice? Love is control. Love is leverage." Daniel's chest tightened with the old reflex to submit, to obey, to inherit the empire built on domination. But Olivia's absence had carved out a truth too deep to ignore. His voice, steady but trembling, cut through the silence. "I won't live your life. I won't chain love into contracts. Not hers, not anyone's." His father's eyes widened, more in disbelief than anger, as if the son he had molded into steel had turned to flesh before him. Daniel felt a strange calm, a liberation heavier than any chain he had broken. For once, he wasn't speaking as the heir or the husband by contract. He was speaking as Daniel, the man who had learned, too late, that real strength was in letting go of control. Leaving that table, Daniel knew he had lost his father's approval forever. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. Olivia's strength grew quietly, like vines breaking through stone. No longer a pawn in men's games, she refused to see herself as a victim of circumstance. She wasn't the girl who had been traded for debts, nor the wife who had signed her name beneath the shadow of power. She was a woman with her own name, her own art, her own story. She began selling her sketches first at local markets, then at small exhibitions. People saw something raw in her lines, something unpolished but true. They didn't see Daniel's wife. They saw Olivia Carter, the artist. Each sale, each compliment, each curious gaze was a reclamation of self. And with every new drawing, she stitched herself back together, not the obedient daughter, not the indebted bride, but the woman who had walked away. When Daniel came to her, he didn't come as a savior or a master. He came as a man changed, stripped of his father's legacy, carrying no contracts, no claims. And Olivia, standing in the doorway of her little apartment with graphite smudges on her hands, realized something vital. She didn't need him to define her. If she chose him, it would be from strength, not from surrender. If she chose solitude, it would still be a victory. For the first time in her life, Olivia understood power, not the kind that enslaves, but the kind that frees. And yet, months later, the world felt different, though nothing outside had changed. Olivia stood in a gallery filled with soft light, her own work lining the walls, sketches, paintings, pieces born from years of silence and sacrifice finally given form. People moved slowly from canvas to canvas, murmuring with admiration, but Olivia barely noticed them. Her heart thudded not from nerves, but from the fragile pride of seeing her name etched on the white placard, Olivia Carter, Collection of Resilience. For years, her art had been confined to notebooks tucked under beds, secret sketches drawn in borrowed moments. Now they were out in the open, hers to share, hers to own. Among the works, one piece drew the most attention, a delicate sketch of two hands reaching toward each other, fingertips almost touching, the space between them heavy with longing. Love unfinished. It was neither bitter nor romantic, but something truer, an acknowledgement that connection is fragile, incomplete, and often more powerful for what is left unsaid. Olivia watched as strangers studied the piece, their expressions shifting from curiosity to quiet understanding. She realized then that her story was no longer about contracts, debts, or borrowed strength. It was about her voice, finally visible. She didn't expect him to come, but when Daniel appeared, he didn't steal the room as he always had. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, no spotlight. He arrived quietly, slipping into the gallery as though he were just another guest, his presence almost hesitant. For a long moment, Olivia kept her eyes on the sketch of the hands, bracing herself. When he finally stepped beside her, the air shifted not with the weight of expectation, but with something gentler, something she had almost forgotten he could offer. Silence that wasn't empty. He leaned closer, his voice low enough for her alone. "No contracts this time," he whispered, his tone stripped of command, of pride, of everything but sincerity. "Just choice." The words hung there, fragile as the space between the sketched fingertips. Olivia felt her throat tighten, memories of betrayal and reconciliation flooding her all at once. He wasn't asking for forgiveness with fireworks or promises of forever. He was offering something simpler, something she had been denied all her life, the freedom to choose. For the first time, Daniel wasn't her captor, her opponent, or even her savior. He was just a man standing beside her, willing to let her decide whether to stay or walk away. Olivia didn't answer him with words. Instead, she let herself breathe, her gaze lingering on the sketch before her. Two hands, almost touching. For so long, she had thought love meant surrender, that to give herself meant to lose herself. But now, as she stood in the gallery filled with her own voice made visible, she knew differently. She could choose. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled, a faint, steady smile that carried no performance, no mask. Not because Daniel was there, not because the world expected it, but because for the first time, she belonged entirely to herself. The camera of this story lingered not on him, not on them, but on her. Olivia Carter, the woman who had walked through humiliation, sacrifice, and betrayal, and emerged not broken but whole. She didn't need a ring to validate her or a contract to define her worth.